So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Awasar. I'm Assistant Director for Academic Affairs at MSU African Studies Center. And this is Eye on Africa, our weekly seminary series. I'm very delighted today to have Dr. Cati Coe as our speaker. A brief introduction. Dr. Coe is a professor of anthropology at Rutgers University. Her research focuses on transnational migration, care, and education in West Africa. Her current book project is on changes in aging and elder care in Ghana. She is the author of The New American Servitude, Political Belonging Among African Immigrant Home Care Workers, 2019, and The Scattered Family, African Migrants, Parenting, and Global Inequality, 2013. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. We're glad to have you. I turn it over to you now, Dr. Coe.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And it's always a delight to have an opportunity to talk about one's research. And I hear you've had a great series with many people from the African continent. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So this paper develops out of a project with Julia Pauli at the University of Hamburg to consider the literature on migration in light of that of social class and vice versa. We argue that each perspective has insights that are somewhat ignored by the other and that help complicate our work productively. And I'm speaking as a migration scholar focused on Ghana, and whereas Julia has worked on marriage and middle classness in Namibia. And that culminated in a special issue in Africa Today and forms the basis of this talk. So increasing interest in the middle class in Africa has prompted new discussions of social class since approximately 2010. However, migration has remained under-researched and under-theorized in the new literature on the African middle classes. Two recently edited volumes on African middle classes hardly mention migration at all. And this is remarkable as remittances play a crucial role in explaining economic dynamics in many African countries, including the formation of middle classes. At the same time, migration research has paid little attention to social class. And in an overview on immigration and social class, Oksana Yakushko comes to the conclusion that social class experiences of recent immigrants have not been the focus of extensive research by scholars. So pointing out how this gap could be overcome, Yakushko suggests examining migrants' social class transitions from their home to their host society. But this is only one possible direction that changes in migrants' social class can take. Migrant social class transformations are not unidirectional, but multiple, including complex movements between social fields and geographic locations, often connecting various class and place-based structures. Consequently, we argue that migration and social class have to be considered together. So analyzing the relationship between them reveals insights that are important for understanding migration's link to global capitalism, both in Africa and more broadly. Class is central to the experiential contradictions of global capitalism. The dispersal of flexible commodity chains and geographically decentered production regimes have resulted in an unevenness in the global distribution of capital, in which Africa has been largely passed over and which Africans attempt to resolve through migration. As capital moves offshore, specialized labor markets, such as in care, have developed in wealthier nations where the demand for cheap immigrant labor is intense. And so the relationships between migration and social class formation are critical to understanding these transformations in global capitalism. Macro structures intersect with the lived experiences of migrants, with their aspirations and hopes, but also their failures to belong through and while in movement. Different social networks and economic resources affect who can migrate, such that it is the middle class that have the greatest opportunities to migrate transnationally. So migration is usually a project in pursuit of well-being, which includes desires for social class mobility. So everyday life as a migrant often increases anxieties about social class, as migrants experience what Boris Nisband calls the status paradox, and Racel Salazar Pareñas calls contradictory class mobility, in which migrants' class status differs in their country of origin and the country to which they migrate. Migrants often occupy multiple class positions simultaneously. For example, Ghanaian migrants typically experience class decline when they migrate, with many moving from a middle-class educated occupation in Ghana to a more menial one in the United States or Europe. Their remittances from menial work allow them to attain some of the attributes of middle-class status in Ghana, such as financial support of relatives, a car and a house, but maintaining such a status in Ghana depends on their remaining abroad. So this phenomenon of migrants' contradictory class status has been documented among Filipino nurses who work as unskilled care workers abroad, and Pakistani women who enter Canada as skilled migrants, but who encounter obstacles to finding work in their skilled professions. Despite the significance of social class to migrants' hopes and experiences, it remains undertheorized in studies of migration. Focusing on migration and social class adds to a better understanding not only of migration, but also of social class. That class status would differ in multiple places raises questions about what social class means, since social class is often used analytically as a fixed identity, which does not change in various contexts. A national frame of reference usually forms the basis for an analysis of social class hierarchy. An alternative, more transnational framework on social class focuses on a global hierarchy in which at the top is a small capitalist class, which moves easily among the financial sectors of global cities, perhaps holding multiple passports. Lower down are urban migrants, those working in manufacturing and service sectors worldwide, who experience limited economic mobility and few political rights. And those at the bottom, the unemployed and very poor, tend not to move. Neither a system of global social hierarchy nor one of separate national class hierarchies entirely makes sense of the social class experiences of Ghanaian migrants. As studies of transnational and rural urban migration show, many migrants from and in Africa manage dual or multiple social fields simultaneously, maintaining ties to their hometowns or countries of origin while being engaged in new relations in their place of migration. Class formation in Africa often straddles rural and urban contexts. And so the focus on social fields rather than a society contained by the nation state draws our attention to the ways that people's lives are experienced simultaneously in multiple social fields. So migrants have multiple class statuses as they participate in various sociocultural milieux. Scholars of migration Peggy Levitt and Nina Glick-Schiller argue that ascertaining the relative importance of nationally restricted and transnational social fields should be a question of empirical analysis. And this paper aims to do just that based on my research. For them, social class status is not unified, but instead fragmented. It's built simultaneously through multiple social contexts, including hierarchical workplaces, and in that sense, corresponding to neither a national context nor a single global frame. However, some of these contexts are linked and others are not, enabling a repositioning of social class in some cases and an intensification of the lack of social mobility in others. And so transnational, national, and local spaces of class formation and reproduction both intersect and are disconnected. This paper also explores the emotional implications of multiple class statuses on migrants' choices and plans. People can try to use their status in one social field to try to offset their lack of status in another. Transnationalism provides one way that they might do so. And I argue that Ghanaian care workers working in a low status and poorly paid profession in the United States try to mitigate the class humiliation they experience in their workplaces by using their class status in Ghana. They hedge one context against the other transnationally and transcontextually. In the process, they reify Ghana and the United States as bounded national spaces, despite the fact that migrants are using both contexts and the linkages between them to pursue their social class projects. For some, the process of hedging their status in Ghana against their status in the United States re-energizes the impetus to live in Ghana. It is in Ghana, in contrast to the United States, that they imagine enjoying the fruits of their labor in migration and where middle-class positioning might be possible. And in particular, I explore this impulse through Houses, a performance of middle-classness with its own characteristic opportunities and limitations. So transnational migration has been a known and valued phenomenon in Ghana since the colonial era, as Ghanaians traveled for work and education in West Africa, Europe, and North America, processes that continued after independence. As transnational migration increased in the 1980s and 1990s, a broader swath of the population, including students and teachers, lower-level civil servants, and skilled blue-collar workers like mechanics and electricians, has increasingly become involved in transnational migration. With the increase in migration from Ghana to the United States since 1990, new Ghanaian immigrants have disproportionately entered the field of elder care employment. My previous ethnographic research with the Ghanaian community in Philadelphia and more broadly along the East Coast found that healthcare in general and nursing assistance in particular is a niche employment sector for Ghanaians. That nursing assistance requires only a few weeks of training and is in high demand because of the aging population of the United States means it's open and attractive to recent immigrants whose education and work experiences may have been substantial, but to pursue them in the United States requires relicensing and retraining. Entry into nursing assistance is a self-reinforcing pattern because their social networks help them find employment in this field. And this occupation results in social class decline for many Ghanaians, some of whom previously enjoyed middle-class occupations in Ghana, particularly if they are men. So this research is based on interviews with 34 Ghanaian care workers, mainly in New Jersey and Maryland. Between December 2014 and August 2016, I interviewed a wider swath of home care workers, but I'm only going to talk about the Ghanaians in this paper. 7 of them were live-in home health workers for an agency in northern New Jersey. The rest were encountered through personal social networks in Maryland and Virginia. And in addition, I have decades-long relationships with 4 care workers, which included observing their visits to and retirement in Ghana and talking to them through the ups and downs of employment. 80% of my interviewees were women, and they ranged in age between 25 and 82, with a median age of 57. The median hourly wage nationally for home care workers was $11.16 in May 2017 when I was doing this research, or just after actually. But the pay is low, but it's better than in many other jobs available to those without a college degree. Full-time work is not guaranteed. Jobs can end unexpectedly and quickly with a patient's death or hospitalization, and sometimes workers struggle to find another full-time job. So the yearly income of home care workers is much lower than what one would expect as a result. Now, and also it's important to note the home care market that I researched was private, meaning it was not state supported. Instead, it was mainly available to the wealthiest 10% of aging adults in the United States who purchased care directly from agencies or individuals they met, paying for care services from their savings or using private long-term care insurance. So I'll discuss the dreams of middle-classness through care workers' investment in houses, From the perspective of my research participants, lacking a house assaulted their dignity, while owning a house was a route to obtain respect. So houses are a way of belonging, which signal or enact an identity, which demonstrates a conscious connection to a particular group. The rationale among Ghanaians to build in the hometown, one study showed, is to signal belonging to that hometown and natural lineage. I would argue that houses indicate a belonging not only to a hometown or nation state, as I think they do, but also to a social class within that social field. Because the middle class in many African countries is defined primarily by its consumption rather than its political orientation or income, houses have become the preeminent site for the everyday reproduction of middle class distinction. Housing, along with other consumption and lifestyle choices concerning children's education, life cycle rituals, goods, and food, serve as the cultural capital deployed by the middle class to engage in social distinction and boundary work. So houses as a performance of social class have particular benefits and limitations, as Claire Mercer discusses in the context of Tanzania. They serve as performative signals of social class, can objectively make and maintain social class. Their relative permanence in comparison to ritual celebrations make them ideal in this regard. Housing shores up claims to land ownership, and land is becoming more important as a sign of class differentiation. A house can be a source of further income and wealth creation by renting out or even selling the house, as a real estate market is developing in urban areas of Ghana. Housing may be safer than other kinds of investment in periods of rampant inflation, or be the site for a business or other economic activity for its residents. On the non-economic side, owning a house allows one to be less reliant on others and to provide housing for relatives, thus establishing a middle-class patron role. In the urban areas of Accra, Kumasi, and Barakrum, one study found homeowners had more people in their households than non-owners, signaling their ability to attract dependents. A house reduces the homeowner's reliance on others, which is a source of humiliation. In contrast to the stigmatization of those without their own house, a homeowner can expect the service of other residents to provide domestic chores like sweeping the compound, running errands, and fetching water. Additional residents provide security because someone is always around. Most importantly, houses, through their visibility and ability to attract people, generate social respect as a sign that one has made it in life. Houses in Ghana are therefore important for their ability to create more economic capital, but they also convert economic wealth into social relations and to status. Investing in housing, however, contains pitfalls in performing social class, as this photo shows. As in Tanzania, rather than signaling the attainment of a middle-class position, houses can illuminate the precarious nature of claims to middle-classness in Ghana. Because houses are built out of concrete blocks by individuals from their savings or income, rather than by large, well-capitalized developers, houses are built over long periods of time in fits and starts as people come into sums of money. This is one reason one can see many half-built houses in progress, or which may never be completed, reminding owners of what they have not accomplished. Houses can entail years of sacrifice, anxiety, and energy overseeing builders. Much of the process of building a house is itself humiliating and time-consuming. Land deeds can be contested, and so houses can be vehicles of wealth extraction as well as wealth creation, resulting in downward mobility because of the possibilities for land litigation and relatives and contractors to cheat owners during house construction. As permanent structures, houses are not a performance that can be modified to suit a new context, unlike a ritual or clothing. They can be sold, but their sale may not be easy and the initial costs may not be recouped. And as a performance, they depend not only on what is under the owner's putative control, the land and the house itself, but also the surrounding context of neighbors' houses and the quality of the local roads. Furthermore, their visibility may attract envy with the dangers that entails. Finally, houses are geographically limited, limiting their visibility to those who pass by or are shown photos, such that migrants have difficulty using houses built in their home country to affect their social class positioning in the places that they live and work, unlike their educations or children's performances. Thus, houses are highly imperfect signs of social class for transnational contexts. And so as a result, those stories are built to solidify social class. Houses often fail to stabilize social position, but instead remind the owner and others of the precarity and instability of social class. So this is a house, the foundation of a house that I visited with a home care worker who was visiting Ghana to oversee the construction and also to help her daughter finish her education in Ghana. And so I visited and they took me to the foundation, and I took what I thought was a very joyful photo of the daughter standing on the foundations of the house. But visiting there with her nephew and his wife and the daughter, there was a sense of the joy not being fully realized. They talked about it only being a half plot. There were all kinds of complaints about the construction and finding a water table and needing to stabilize the foundations further. And as we were walking away, a land guard ran after us and said, where is my $1,000 that you promised me? And so there was a kind of a feeling of humiliation and also a threat, suggesting that Millicent's house building was in fact not stabilizing her social class position, but instead kind of using up her money, was the way she said. She talked about it at the end of that visit. Now, people who never migrate can build houses, but one of the ways that people can afford to build a house is by going abroad. International migrants are expected to build houses because migration is associated with money and class mobility. So when Monica, a single mother who worked in home care in the United States, talked about visiting Ghana, she told me that she chafed at staying in her mother's house where her children were living in Ghana. She would stay for a few days and then decamp to a friend's house and then move again, never settling in one place. She said staying with her mother disgraces her, and I would not get respect. It puts you down. It can limit your self-esteem. The people around her make fun of her. Oh yes, little comments. For example, she's been in the US all this time and she doesn't have a place. They're making comments like this. Everyone is praying for a house of their own. So those who migrate into insecure and low-paid work like nursing assistants find it more difficult to live up to the expectation that they ought to be able to attain a high social class in Ghana, as exemplified by a house of their own. And in general, contemporary migrants are finding it more difficult to live up to these expectations than previous cohorts of migrants. They're less well educated, they're less likely to be members of a cosmopolitan elite. And since 2000, the middle class in Ghana has expanded and grown wealthier. And so living up to their expectations has gotten harder as well. So it's increasingly visible in mansions and gated communities and malls around Accra, which feature heavily in music videos and other media representations. And so the lifestyle of the Ghanaian middle class has created higher expectations for migrants and made it more difficult for them to present a middle class status by building an elaborate house. The higher cost of living in Ghana because of its economic growth and migrants' remittances has resulted in a decline in the value of remittances, which can purchase less than they did in the past. Land prices have risen in all parts of the country, but particularly in Accra and other cities in the south. So care workers' narratives about houses are critical to their own sense-making about their differing class positions in multiple social fields. They use three different kinds of houses. The houses they build or dream of building in Ghana, the houses they buy and sometimes lose in the United States, and the houses they work in while providing care to aging adults in the United States. In particular, I argue that they turn to house building in Ghana to attain some of the self-worth that's threatened by their work in the United States. Though building a house is considered the typical culturally appropriate project for a migrant, for home care workers, it becomes an emotionally fraught and desired goal because of the conditions of their work. From working in others' houses, they understand at a visceral level what a house of their own means for their class status and worth as a person. So working in someone else's home was often experienced as a threat to the care worker's social class because they were positioned as a domestic servant. They had to accommodate themselves to the homeowner's routine, such as their sleeping and eating schedules. One live-in worker said they may say, "Don't use this, don't cook." Like with my current client, I don't cook over there. When the food is finished, I have to come home. I bring my cooked food to her house and reheat it there. They complain about my cooking fish. And for her, this rule about not cooking indicated larger issues about her own dignity. They treat you like you are not a human being. Second, home care workers felt physically trapped because they had always had to be with the patient. This was particularly true of live-in workers. The house becomes a total institution in which their everyday routines are monitored and controlled. Some workers felt the need to escape from this space momentarily, whether physically or psychically. Many welcomed my phone calls for the opportunity of mental escape. Some prefer to work with patients who live in a continuing care facility because of the possibility of meeting other care workers and reducing their isolation. One care worker told me she'd taken an unauthorized walk around the facility while her patient was napping. Finally, the wealth and status of the patient are on display in the size and location of their house. Monica told me about a situation where she felt degraded by her patient's daughter. She said, "We're human beings." I could see she wanted to mop me on the floor the first time. It was a mansion. The daughter was the VP for a company and had a high position. I was a Black girl from Africa. She thought I was nothing. I was from Africa. So when she says sit, I have to sit. It distressed her that I'd come to her mother's beautiful house to be in charge. So several important things are going on in this description. The family had attained a high position in society, as indicated by the daughter's work role, but also by the mother's mansion and beautiful house. Monica's lowly status in the daughter's eyes, as she describes it, reflects her racialization in the United States and her geographic origin from Africa. So houses are connected in this narrative to wealth and race, and the denigration is expressed eloquently in the metaphor of housework. She wanted to mop me on the floor, and Monica in this formulation becomes the mop itself, not even the wielder of the mop. She's a tool and not a person. Thus, her low status was attributed to her complex and multi-stranded relationship to her patient's house, which turned her into a cleaning implement and denied her personhood. Sometimes the insult is expressed through spatial segregation, common in the history of denigration by racial status in the United States. Bathrooms became a key symbolic site of such spatial segregation within houses. An agency staff member told me about patients distancing tactics. This was before the pandemic. One asked a care worker to sit on the floor rather than on the furniture, or they don't want them to use the same bathroom they do, but use maybe the bathroom in the lobby of the independent living facility where they reside, so they have to go down the hall and outside of the apartment. When I called Irene, a live-in care worker, one day, she told me how the daughter of her patient was upset at her for using the upstairs bathroom at night. Irene, feeling slighted, wanted to tell the daughter that she had 4 bathrooms in her own house in Kumasi, but she remained silent. The patient's house is used as a tool to maintain the care worker's relatively low status And in response, care workers want to use their class status in Ghana to combat the denigration felt at work in the United States. So the humiliations that care workers experience make them eager to have their own house, whether in Ghana or the United States, in order to restore their dignity. So Monica, for example, as a single mother in her 30s, dreams of a house in Ghana. If I have money, I would like to go home. I still have a dream. I'm living in a house with a successful husband, but how will it happen? It's like a fantasy, but I've been seeing it. It's like I'm living it. I have a successful husband with the kids jumping up and down on the couch, and I'm busy just coming from work, and I need to clean and cook. I just want to be home with a nice house, working hard with an intelligent, successful husband. So this is a middle-class dream, I think. The house in Ghana is operating in complex ways. It functions as an extension of the self. The house is a sign of success after years of degradation in others' houses. It's a site that's seen as enabling sociability, including time with children and other relatives. In comparison to the physical isolation and long hours of home health work in the United States. For Monica, Ghana is imagined as a space for the nuclear family with happy, lively children, a supportive income-generating spouse. This is a middle-class fantasy in which both parents work, coming home in the evening, and the children are treated in permissive ways, such as they can play on the living room furniture. It's a space where she imagines her domestic chores as contributing to her own middle-class life, rather than doing them for someone else. For those older than Monica, the sociability is associated with retirement and the end of work, using the catchphrase of sitting under the mango tree, associated with a cool breeze in the shade, chatting with friends and relaxing. My research participants working long hours in someone else's house were absorbed by dreaming about and planning for a house in Ghana, acquiring land, supervising construction, visiting Ghana to oversee progress, and saving money. Now, the practicalities of their social class position in the United States placed obstacles in the way of these fantasies of middle-class housing. The low pay of home health work makes it difficult to build a house in Ghana. Monica estimated that to build a one-bedroom house in Ghana would cost her $30,000 to $40,000, much less than a house in New Jersey where she worked, but still a large sum of money. She said, "When will you get that money from this job? Only if you have two incomes." She said that one of her friends had been building a house in Ghana for 12 years and was still not finished, making her wonder if it was possible to accomplish it all. And one home care worker I knew retired to Ghana at the age of 70 after 48 years in the United States. She hadn't been able to build a house in Ghana, and she returned to live in a room in her family house in her hometown. Also, because they take years to build, houses in Ghana require the extended deferral of the mitigation of denigration that's happening daily in care workers' workplaces. And so social class in Ghana sometimes works as a hedge against social class degradation in the United States by imagining your 4-bed bathrooms. Care workers' social class positions in the United States affect their ability to build a house in Ghana. And so this means that social class positioning has an impact across national frames of reference, pointing to the fact that a global frame of reference for social class may be becoming more salient, but not consistently so at this point. So let me turn now to the third kind of house in the United States and its meaning in the class system. For many Americans, a home is their major asset and form of wealth. Americans expect houses will appreciate in economic value and provide a nest egg for retirement and other needs. For most Americans, homeownership is a key symbol of the American dream, and houses confer the quality of public schooling for children, enabling the inheritance of social class. So because of the centrality of home ownership to stable middle-class adulthood in the United States, the federal government has supported home ownership, particularly for whites, through publicly backed loans. So home ownership may result in middle-class status for many Americans, but Among the African care workers, I knew it could be a source of wealth extraction, rather than wealth creation. And I'll illustrate this through the experience of Elizabeth, a live-in home care worker. So Elizabeth came to the United States from Ghana in 1974. And when I met her in February 2016, she was living in a solid brick, 2-story, 4-bedroom house with a driveway, 2-car garage, and a yard in a suburban middle-class African-American neighborhood in Prince George's County, Maryland. And I've pictured it here after 3 years later. She was to lose this house to foreclosure in the next year. She had calculated she paid $500,000 in mortgage payments over 13 years. Though she bought the house for $320,000, Zillow, an online source of housing information, valued it at only $240,000 at the time of our interview, or half of what she'd spent. She'd sacrificed for the house. For 13 years, she delayed visiting Ghana to pay the mortgage. Now, what happened to Elizabeth is similar to the experience of many African-American homeowners, particularly those who bought houses, as she did during the boom in real estate prices during the early 2000s, and whose houses lost a lot of value during the housing crash of 2007-2008. This historical event resulted in the wealth depletion of African Americans, even more so than white owners. I'm not aware of any study that tracks what happens to immigrant homeowners. Though most houses lost value in 2007-2008, the housing market in general had regained its vigor in 2016, but not in African American neighborhoods. So a Washington Post analysis of the Atlanta area and an analysis by Knight Ridder of the 300 largest metropolitan areas found that housing values recovered less from the housing market crash in zip codes where African Americans were the largest racial group by US racial categories. Right? The zip code of Elizabeth's mainly African American middle-class neighborhood suffered twice as many foreclosures as the United States as a whole. Even upper middle-class African Americans who bought large houses in suburban neighborhoods around Atlanta saw their houses decrease in value, so that they ended up paying more on their mortgages than the worth of the house. So why does owning a house result in wealth depletion for African Americans, and by extension, Ghanaian migrants who are treated as belonging to this racial category in the United States? Some of the reasons reflect discrimination in the housing industry, with African Americans targeted for predatory lending during the housing bubble, making them more vulnerable to foreclosure due to rising interest rates. The foreclosure of one house affects the value of neighboring houses. Furthermore, African American neighborhoods are less attractive to whites, leading to fewer potential buyers and less price competition. These processes speak to systemic racism, less visible than the racist humiliations that Ghanaian care workers experienced at work, but affecting them nonetheless. Finally, mortgages may make sense for those in occupations with a steady monthly income and salary increases for seniority and experience, but not for the increasingly common conditions of income volatility among poor and working class Americans. In home care, experience and seniority do not matter. Periods of unemployment and underemployment characterize the temporal rhythm of home care. Thus, Elizabeth said she had fallen behind on mortgage payments during a period of unemployment when her leg was bothering her. And she's not the only Ghanaian care worker I met with housing troubles in the United States. Millicent, whose house in Ghana I showed you, also suffered foreclosure on a much cheaper townhouse. And for both Elizabeth and Millicent, marital conflicts compounded their financial difficulties when their husbands refused to pay their share of the mortgage. For both, the foreclosure of the US house hastened their return migration and simultaneous retirement to Ghana. So for Elizabeth, the loss of her house signaled her lack of acceptance in the United States. She spoke painfully about her experiences of racism and exclusion. The loss of the house and its deeper meaning hurt her. She told me that sometimes she just shut the door to her room in her patient's residence and cried. She contrasted the welcome Americans receive in Ghana to that of Ghanaians in the United States, When Americans go to Ghana, they are welcomed as sisters and brothers lost to the transatlantic slave trade. But when Africans come to the United States, quote, we're not accepted, unquote. The house was emotionally significant to her because it symbolized she had not achieved economic mobility in the United States, and as such, did not belong there. The house was a symbol of belonging to a particular class, and by extension, to a particular country. I have a short film about Elizabeth. I put the link here in case you'd like to hear a little bit more about her experience. Practically and economically, the foreclosure spurred her return to Ghana. Without a house, she could not afford to live in the United States if she stopped working. Her Social Security retirement benefits, based on 40 years of low wages, would not stretch far in the United States. It would not cover the cost of housing and other necessities in the expensive housing market of metropolitan Washington, D.C. In Ghana, in contrast, she built one house and was in the process of building another. The land had been acquired cheaply in Accra, where she was from, through family, and a long time ago when land prices were cheaper. Her low wages and housing difficulties in the United States delayed the completion of the second house, where she hoped to live one day. When I visited her in her first house in December 2016, she was staying with her nephew, his wife, and their affectionate toddler. It seemed to me that only in Ghana would she be able to obtain a comfortably middle-class old age. We literally sat in the shade of a mango tree together. And at that time, Elizabeth blamed her travails on the United States, praised Ghana for its opportunities and fairness in contrast. In Ghana, a house could not be taken away from you, she said, although I knew people who had lost land through litigation. She idealized aging in Ghana in comparison to the United States. Here in Ghana, people take care of you, referring to her nephew and his wife, whereas the United States is not a good place for people to grow old. Thus, she reified Ghana and the United States as completely different, with Ghana offering opportunities for her social class maintenance in contrast to the United States. However, such an opportunity to live a good life in Ghana depended in part on her migration, on her previous migration. As time passed, her social class positioning in Ghana became more complicated than I initially thought. By the end of 2018, finding it difficult to make ends meet in Ghana, she was back in the United States to work despite her precarious health. Having completed the second house, she was hoping to sell the first one to fund her retirement. Potential buyers liked the house itself, but the road outside was unpaved and became quite rutted during the rainy season. As a result, she was having difficulty selling the house, speaking to the opportunities as well as the limitations of using houses as an economic investment in Ghana. As for the greater sociality that houses enabled in Ghana, her role as a patron to younger and poorer relatives had led to envy and mistrust rather than family support. She told me she'd kicked her nephew and his family out of the house because she'd felt they were trying to poison her to take it over. Thus, even the social rewards of housing were fraught and contentious. So as I have shown, I hope, migrants can try to offset their low class status in one context by their higher class status in another, using transnationalism to mitigate a humiliating class status. Houses are often key to fantasies of middle class life, and thus become central to migrants' emotional and practical class-making projects. Despite the allure of a house for its stability and permanence, houses are precarious social and economic investment for lower income migrants. They lead to both status and shame. Many accomplish the status of a built house in Ghana, given enough time abroad, but only a few can afford a house in the United States, which depends on a strong and stable economy, a regulated financial sector, a stable personal life, particularly in terms of a supportive marriage, and stable employment. Predatory lending, booms and busts, an economic recession, marital conflicts, a health crisis, or a period of unemployment can undo years of hard work, and a house can be lost to foreclosure. While a house being built in Ghana can be placed on hold if one experiences economic difficulties, a bank mortgage requires a stable income. Thus, in many ways, a house in Ghana is more possible than a house in the United States, meaning that home care workers can attain a middle-class status only in Ghana, if they ever do. At the same time, a low-wage occupation makes it more challenging to attain a middle-class status in Ghana, indicating the ways that Ghana and the United States are linked transnationally, linked unevenly, but linked nonetheless. So neither national class hierarchies nor an emergent global class hierarchy makes sense of migrant care workers' experiences and emotions. Instead, both are operating simultaneously in complex ways in migrants' class projects. Thus, within contemporary global capitalism, we need to account for the complexity and multiplicity of social class. Migration and return migration become the means by which people seek to manage their social class projects across the transnational, national, and local social fields where social class mobility is made and unmade. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Forward to whatever questions that you might have, or comments. I look forward to interacting with you in this kind of space, even though it's not quite like being there in person and having a chance to chat.
Well, we're very glad to have you, and I'm sure we'll get some questions. I see some down. And thank you for really a very brilliant presentation. I'll just start by asking one question. Are Ghanaians and Africans in general, are they aware that they will lose their status when they come in the US? And has there been, I was in literature that at the beginning, it seemed they did not know, but given what has happened through the years, I know in at least a Francophone literature, there is a whole literature just devoted to that topic of what to expect when you go. I don't know how available that is to the general public. So and you also reference what's happening in Canada, and it seems many African immigrants are very disappointed when they go to Canada. So I was just wondering what happens in the US in relation to Ghanaians. What do they expect? Do they have any idea of what's waiting them when they come in the US?
So I entirely agree with what you've said, that at the beginning there were much higher hopes than there are now, and there is more information now about what one will expect. But I still have encountered disappointment. So particularly those who come over through the diversity visa lottery, where there is a criteria that you have a certain level of education. And so those people expected that when they came to the United States, they would work as teachers. They would continue to work as teachers. And so then they were clued in among Ghanaians in the United States. And maybe the person who sponsored them would say, no, you are not going to work as an accountant. The only job that you're going to get is in healthcare. And some of them resisted this advice and tried to find a job for several years in their field, or often not several years, but for several months. And then as a result of disappointment said, well, I'll go into healthcare because the jobs are there, and it only requires just a few, for nursing assistants, just 6 to 8 weeks of education, depending on what state you're in, maybe $1,500 for such training. So you can kind of raise that from your relatives in the United States. So there is more, and there is in Ghana more a sense of, I would say, migrants used to be looked upon as inherently rich. And there is also in Ghana now a sense of, well, maybe they are and maybe they aren't. So there is more awareness, but it's still quite variable, and people may still come with an expectation that they'll earn a lot of money very quickly, even if they're working in a menial position, that they're willing to take on that work because of what the US dollar will mean in their home country.
Thank you very much.
Good question.
I think Dr. Kennedy, you raised your hand. Do you want to talk? I think you can unmute yourself and talk directly. Okay, so while I will try again. We have a question here by Walter. How does Indigenous Ghanaians perceive the middle class Ghanaians from the US?
So they expect them to be patrons, and they expect them to be be able to build large houses. I think some of the humiliation that that Millicent experienced when visiting her foundations of her house was the relatives expecting more from her, and that makes it particularly difficult for these home care workers to live up to these expectations that Ghanaians have of migrants. And so some of them are quite explicit about what they do, and to say, look, this is the work I do in order to ward off relatives' claims to their wealth, but they may perform it nonetheless, a kind, of going out to eat or renting a car or dressing in ways that are not quite, which are somewhat unusual for older Ghanaian women, that sort of signal, I guess, an American style of dress. So there's various ways that they also perform a migrant status, and others just kind of do hide what they do, saying they're a nurse, for example. So within the general range of kind of healthcare occupations, they might hide that, and try to live up to these standards. So that's certainly part of the kind of the shame that Monica felt about living in her mother's house, was that she wasn't living up to these expectations that people have of migrants.
Thank you. Dr. Kennedy, you can talk.
Yeah, thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I'll make a comment, then I have a question. I think what you said, this could be for any other African countries. Most of the things that you mentioned are really typical, the misconception and so on, the challenges of wanting to do something at home when you have some money here, and realizing that the dreams are not as good as you thought. So I really appreciate this presentation. You could have probably, apart from examples, said Africa instead of Ghana. I mean, you would be still right. Now my question is, I saw your conclusions, but what's the take-home message? I mean, if I were to talk to people wanting to come to the US, or what's the real take-home practical message that I should tell them?
In what way? What would they be asking you?
Well, I mean, they're having these big dreams, come here and make it, and then have projects at home and so on. That's the kind of the normal thing, everybody thinks they can make it here, get money, and can build nice houses in Accra or Kampala, Nairobi, and so on.
I think that those who are educated in the United States have a much easier time in the employment market than those who have comparable credentials in their home countries. So that's just, I mean, and it's, it's a really, I think, many Africans come, they have higher levels of education than native-born Americans, and yet those credentials are not recognized. They cannot translate those. Now, in some situations, anyway, each teacher is certified by a state, but it's also that a teacher training college maybe 3 years, whereas to not be recognized as a bachelor's degree. I mean, depending on whether teacher training colleges were made into universities in a particular country or not. But so is it recognized as equivalent to a bachelor's degree? And so it may mean that you come and you have to spend 3 or 4 years, trying to get an education, maybe by working part-time or full-time on the side, and you've got your relatives there and you've got your children here, and it just all kind of collapses. So, I mean, just in terms of in some ways, I feel like the advice is for actually the United States is about recognizing credentials of immigrants, making it easier to get the further education, recognizing the kind of work experiences that people have that might allow for, might count for something along the way in getting this credential. And the other big problem for home care workers is that there's no route to getting further education. And so that too is kind of creating a career pathway within healthcare is also really, really important in terms of just how does one create upward mobility. So I think those are some of the things that are really important for African immigrants, but I think not something that they can kind of do on their own. And of course, getting an education in the United States is itself, that implies a certain level of family wealth, right? If one is applying as an international student, it may not be possible. But it's really sad to me to see how someone who worked as a nurse in Ghana has to spend years working as a home care worker in the United States before she can work. She has to, before she, so she has to pass an exam. Sometimes it can take a long time for her to do so because she's earning a living alongside that. But then even when she does, hospitals will say you need experience in a US hospital, and they will say, well, how do I get that? Anyway, it becomes a catch-22.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a question from Jonathan. Thanks for the informative talk. Why did you choose to study the category of population you studies and focus on housing?
So it just seemed to me to be so important for this group of people. So I'm not very interested in housing, perhaps, but they made me interested in housing. That was the thing that they were clearly dreaming about. And it is as if, I don't think it's that unusual, but people were pouring themselves into these houses, both the houses they worked in, but also the houses that they were trying to build in Ghana. So they were just so emotionally invested in their houses. And so trying to unpack, well, why was that? And what did it mean? And what did houses mean for these transnational migrants? And of course, housing has a lot of meaning in the United States in terms of social class, but also in Ghana, but slightly different. And so unpacking both of those was really important. I don't know if does that answer your question? Was it also just about the population? Was it more about the population than about the houses?
Yeah, maybe he will.
Maybe I'll just say about home care workers, again, that wasn't something I chose to do. I had done a previous project on transnational families in which the parents were in the United States and they'd either left their children behind in Ghana in the care of aunts or grandmothers or uncles or family friends, or in some cases, they sent their babies back to Ghana to be raised there. And all of the parents, most of the parents, 90% of the parents I met were working in elder care, in home care or in nursing homes. And I thought, well, is this part of this project about scattered families and parenting across long distance? And I thought, I think I have to explore this topic of elder care and what this work means for this group of immigrants in terms of their incorporation into the United States, in terms of their feeling of belonging, because they seemed so racialized by it, and also kind of seemed to take a certain identity from their work that affected then their parenting as well. So it was connected, but I took it on as its own project.
Thank you.
Thank you for these great questions.
So Walter was asking about the slides for your presentation, but for everybody, this is recorded. It will be available on our website. If you want to go later and review it, you can do that. 2 to 3 days, it should be available. And we have a question from Lisa. He say, in one point, Margaret stated that family takes care of you in Ghana. Then she turns around and kicks her nephew and family out of the house because she felt they were trying to poison her. Why would she feel this way? So I guess it's interesting, this idea of returning, you know.
Yeah, and the migrants tended to idealize return before they did. And then when they got there, it became a little bit more complicated. So this process of return that looked, at first like a retirement, a permanent retirement, it was quite common to come back to the United States, sometimes for just a visit, for healthcare or to see grandchildren or something like that. But in fact, and among more middle-class Ghanaians, there is in fact a desire to have a retirement that's sort of split, maybe half the year in the United States and half in Ghana. But for these women, it was more, they had to come back for work. So yeah, she thought her family was going to take care of her in Ghana. And she had a house where she could, be a patron to them. And I don't quite know what went wrong, but it also doesn't surprise me in a sense. I mean, that this can happen in families, this feeling that your intimates might be trying to kill you. And so she brought in another kind of member of the house, of the family, actually a stepchild, to live in the house when she returned to the United States. And maybe that relationship will last and be positive, or maybe that too will go sour. But this can happen, that not everyone is necessarily going to treat the patron in the way the patron would like. There can be all sorts of tensions in that, and in this case, I mean, I just heard her side of the story. So but yeah, what she said was they wanted to kill me because they know that my son would like to stay in the United States, is not interested in this house, and so if I were to die, they could stay in this house themselves. They would inherit the house. So that was it was sad, but this kind of tension between families can happen. She still thinks she might return to Ghana, but now she's thinking more about paid care, about hiring someone to do the kind of job she's doing in the United States to take care of her and not being reliant on family. And there is a new care industry in Accra, mainly working for, the elite, but also some return migrants, who have found family to be unwilling or overly burdened by care. Not necessarily in a negative relationship like this, but that care market, these kind of commodified care services do exist in Accra.
Thank you. Anne has a question about people having two houses. So let me see. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to speak about Kenya. In some Kenyan communities, having a home in the village is a marker of success and a marker of masculinity. When a man dies without a home, it is a shame, and a temporary shelter has to be built before the burial. So people always feel pressure to have two homes, one in the city or abroad and another one in the village. Is this practice similar in Ghana? Secondly, Ghanaians abroad form groups to buy land and build in certain section in Ghana? So that are the two questions.
Yeah, those are excellent questions. So I think this too has changed over time, that yes, people would prefer, I think, so the preference is to build in the hometown and to build in the city, that you want a place, or in the regional capital, I guess. So either in the capital or the regional capital, that can provide a little bit of distance from the claims of people in the hometown, but where you have a presence in the hometown. People can look at your house, sometimes an empty house there. And not everyone can afford to do that. And it is quite interesting to me, where do migrants build a house? And of course, generally, it's cheaper to build a house in the hometown than in one of the cities. That land is more expensive in the cities. So the two women I profiled here were both from Accra. So they were building in the hometown, which has now become a capital city. That was part of how they were able to get access to land. They still had to purchase it, but probably they purchased it at a lower price through those connections. And they were not building. So for them, this wasn't an issue. But I know that there's work being done by Edmuta Elber in Benin about the northern Benin elite building in the regional capital, close to the hometown, but not in the hometown itself, to sort of create a little distance from those claims. I think also women's building a house, it's a little bit different for men than for men. That for women to build a house is a sign of status, but it's not so much expected as it is for men. So the kind of the shame of not having a house is, I think, a little bit less for women. It certainly functions as a form of security, particularly when marriages are fragile, and they can be made a little bit more fragile through migration. So I don't think women have quite as strong of pressure on them to build a house, but when they do, they actually, maybe they get more status from that than men do for doing that. I haven't heard about buying land in common and building in certain sections. That sounds fascinating, because then it would create a sort of migrant neighborhood, right? A return migrant neighborhood, or an urban migrant neighborhood. So that's quite fascinating, but I haven't heard of that. That is all individual, and it's an individual accomplishment. Although certainly in the past, it's certainly, like for cocoa farms, there was kind of group land buying. So that kind of with it, often of a kind of family group, or people who were connected by family. So it has been present in Ghana in the past, but I haven't seen it for buying land for a house. Good question.
Thank you. We have one question from Emily. She wants to know, to what extent do you think performances of migration status, and I'm thinking of social media posts in particular, and attempts to live up to remittance and gifting expectations from friends and family back in Ghana exacerbate those pressures and create further social tension? I am a PhD candidate who did research with young men in suburban Accra, and my interlocutors were constantly showing me the social media photos of people they knew from school who had won the DV lottery or found other ways to make it to the US. The photos were always, from my perspective as an American, very staged and intended to perform a certain kind of expected status. Meanwhile, all my interlocutors in Ghana ever did was complain about how much their former acquaintances were enjoying life abroad and how they had forgotten everyone left behind and become selfish.
Yes, that's an excellent comment, Emily. I too have seen these social media posts in which people are all dressed up and standing in front of cars that are, quite fancy cars. Maybe the cars belong to them, maybe they don't, or they're in a park, or they're in front of a house. I mean, this may be another way that houses can function in the performance of social class, where you don't even know if it's yours or not, right? But the assumption is that it is. I guess this goes back to the first question of how do people in Ghana perceive migrants? And you're suggesting that in fact, they do see them as wealthy. And this then allows them to put kind of pressure on them to not forget them, right? I mean, in part, it's these expectations of migrants then, really put stress on them to do more. But this performance of success is, I think, the migrants aren't, they really feel it, that they don't want to be labeled as a fool or as useless. This would be like the worst insult. And so I think that's what, I was just really struck by Monica not wanting to stay in her mother's house, which she said was comfortable in the sense, right? It wasn't like a crowded house. Her own children were staying there while she was working in the United States. They were staying with her grandmother, and yet she felt this very strong shame about, what would the neighbors say about her, that she doesn't have a place of her own. And so I think that migrants are absolutely performing a particular social class. And I think this goes back to the learning of, I didn't talk much about this, but how do migrants learn what to do? They learn about how to build houses from each other. They learn about, how to pose in front of the cars, right, from these social media posts. The learning of what a social class project ought to look like is very much, part of the networks, part of the conversations that migrants are having with each other, giving each other advice, telling each other what to do, sharing their own experiences, and often thinking about the experiences of others and planning their own life course trajectory. So kind of figuring out how to be mobile in the United States or how to be mobile back in Ghana, those are things they're learning from each other. And of course, the conditions under which they might attain mobility are changing all the time. But they're kind of navigating their way through that through what they hear from each other.
Thank you so much. And I think Walter wants to talk. Try to mute on yourself. I think you should be able to talk. Walter? Okay, so let's take a question and we'll come back to Walter. Paul say, hi, Katie, it's good to see you. Thanks so much for this talk. You make a great point about how migrants hedge their Ghanaian class status as a way to compensate for their diminished class status in the US. The examples you showed seemed to indicate that this was primarily an internal strategy that is not expressed outwardly to others. Have you found that this hedging is expressed to others in the US in some cases?
Yeah, this was a real puzzle to me because obviously, right, these so hi, Paul. Yes, good to see you in this way, in this limited way. You know, there Emily is showing how these performances of social class, right, can translate through social media. And it was the houses in the US that could perform social class in the US because neighborhood or, you know, mentioning the town where you lived was because we are living in such segregated ways that could indicate social class or one's education. But the houses in Ghana just didn't, they didn't translate, although they often had pictures on their phones and things like that. But I think it was partly also that they, that part of their denigration was that they didn't feel they could really argue back against the people who were functioning as their employers. And so it did function more as an internal, yes, I am human, right? Rather than pursuing a kind of an argument that might lead to, you know, the person could dismiss them. They could call the agency up and say, I don't like this care worker. She's disrespectful. She has to go. She loses a job right there. And it may take 2 weeks for her to for the agency to give her a new job, particularly if someone's complained about her. So they not in all the way that they tended to fight against this denigration was actually just to leave the case and that without saying anything to anybody or to say I have a funeral or, you know, some other excuse that so that there was no direct critique, that they did not feel that they could in fact fight against these very difficult work conditions in which they had no power, I guess, or very little power.
Thank you. Walter, you have the floor.
Yeah, Cati, I just want to thank you for a very excellent presentation. I was just wondering when you were presenting, I saw a lot of Cameroon in Ghana. I saw a lot of Northwest Cameroon in Ghana because you find migrants who show their wealth only in the type of houses they build. But where I saw a sharp difference was that you used the concept of transnationalism. But if we were to use diaspora, because we have internal diasporas in Africa as well, people who migrate to the city will always want to build more comfortable homes in their home villages. And the houses that remain in the city are some sort of, okay, we'll leave this for the kids. It is some sort of investment for the family. But life in the cultural senses of the West African, if life has to get any meaning to any migrant, you must have a house in the village. If you don't have a house in the village, then your life doesn't have any meaning. I'm coming back to this because you said you just took up houses because you love to research on houses. Yeah, there's something deeper in the sense of West Africans when it comes to houses. If you don't have a house in the village, because life, wherever you migrate to the world, ends in the village, and the village will know that this is somebody who has succeeded only by seeing the house which you built. But recently, there is an upsurge, a renewed type of big houses, very big houses. People construct very big houses. This is the sense I see in Northwest Cameroon. Not in the sense of Elizabeth in the outskirts of Accra, 2-3 rooms, but you see houses, mega houses. But these people build these houses and they tend to live all their lives in a city. That is really the opposite sense of it, because they don't live in the houses. So they just build it so that people can also see that this migrant has actually constructed well-to-do houses, to the extent that if you were to make a survey in rural Ghana, you will find that most comfortable houses are constructed by these migrants who unfortunately are not living in these houses. That is just the comment I wanted to make. I did not really have a question.
Well,
Thank
I
you.
think you raised so many important points, Walter. This question of who is the major audience for this performance of social class.
Exactly.
And then also, I think, just this is speaking more to the transnational migration literature, that it kind of, this was more at the beginning, but it sort of saw transnational migration as a totally new phenomenon, and ignored really this long history in Africa of rural to urban migration, and that people are, in terms of their learning about social class performances, they're mainly adapting what, the experiences of across the generations of what they've learned from urban migration, and changing it in the context of transnational migration, but so I think the comment about Kenya was also kind of speaking to that issue. And then, I mean, the other big point is just that houses are so important to individuals, and can function as a performance in your absence. And my experience also is that there also does tend to be someone living there, generally the relatives of that person, or the dependent, anyway, the poorer relatives of that person are staying in the house. And so the wealthier person in the city or abroad is also functioning as a kind of patron to them, and showing, yeah, I can take care of people as well, right? So it's doing multiple things simultaneously. Very excellent points.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, Awa, you are muted.
Sorry, I thought somebody else wanted to talk. Let me see. No.
If there is nobody, can I talk again?
Go ahead, go ahead.
Sorry, thank you very much, Awa. Thank you very much. I want to take Cati into another very interesting point which you raised, and which you can as well also look into it. Look at the situation of these transnational migrants trying to build back at home. Do you see any form of exploitation from those who stay behind to construct these houses? For example, they want to build a house for 1 million, or call it 5 million, Ghanaian cedis. And then their house in the original amount could be like 3 million or 2 million cedis. And then you finally see that you have spent close to 5 million cedi. And in certain situations, these transnational migrants will send this money for construction, and the relatives will go to take different pictures and send to New York or to which part of America. And then the transnational migrant keeps on feeling that the construction is going on until the day he or she lands in Ghana and sees no house. I think I have experienced this situation in Cameroon not once, not twice, not thrice. And it might interest you also to find out this type of niches, this type of small things that lies under constructing a house from a distance.
Yeah, it's a major concern for migrants. And I'm remembering an incident where one home care worker I knew related a story of a friend of hers who had built a house in Ghana, and got into a conflict with his sister about her clothes being on the line, and I don't know, he moved her clothes, and she got angry with him, and she told him, actually, the house is in my name. And he decided this was the end of it. He was not going to be connected to his family in Ghana. They had totally betrayed him. And the home care worker, said to him, no, you've got to, you are not going to be able to grow old in the United States, and you must rely on your family in Ghana. And so that was quite interesting. But absolutely, there are all kinds of, I mean, this is this kind of sense of poison, that the people who you trust the most may really undermine you. They may take the property from you, and you ask them to go to the lands office and they put it in their name, or they take the money and they send you pictures of a beautiful house that turns out not to be yours but your neighbor's, right? And you get there and there's nothing there. But then there's also these land guards who are really exploiting all property owners. That just seemed to be a kind of an organized criminal activity that was preying on those who seemed to be wealthier. So there were a lot of ways that houses could lead to status. But a lot that could also and could lead to renting out the property and kind of a more steady income in retirement. But you could also really lose everything that you had worked for, and particularly because these migrants, they felt like they were really working hard in order, to build this dream in Ghana. Like that was mitigating what they were going through now. I mean, those disappointments were just, really, really extraordinary, both because of the loss of family relationships and finding out what people were really like, but also just this feeling that what they had worked for had just disappeared because of others' actions, others' greed. So
okay,
that's a terrible note to end on. No, I don't.
Yeah, it happens. Constructing from a distance has actually traumatized some of these migrants.
Yeah.
Because a migrant now finds himself or herself in between. You are in the US or in Europe trying to make ends meet, struggling with winter, struggling with all sorts of odds, and then trying to build a comfortable house in Ghana. And back in Ghana, you cannot succeed. So it becomes sometimes quite traumatizing.
Yeah. And so for the elite, they have turned to kind of developers because, but only the very wealthy can do that. But that kind of creates a sort of a feeling of trust in that. But that's not available for more low income migrants. So that So this and some do succeed. I mean, I shouldn't, many do succeed in building a house in Ghana, despite all of these, despite these tragedies and these problems that get in the way.
We're almost out of time, so really thank you once again, Dr. Cati, for coming and sharing your research with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everybody who came today and asked a question. I think it was a great conversation. Thank you, and see you next Thursday.
Thank you for all your
questions.
Thank you,
Awa.
Thank you, Walter. Nice to see you.
Thank you. You know the name Awa actually comes from Bamenda. You have a Cameroonian name.
Actually, it's an African name.
Yeah, it's really great. Awa.
I'm from Senegal.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure meeting everybody. I think I was reminded for this meeting just about 30 minutes to time, and I was really happy that I was reminded and I made it. Thank you so much.
We're glad you were able to join us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cati, again. It was really great.
There was one more question.
One more question.
Who is asking a question?
How has technology? Another time. We'll bring Katie another time to MSU in person.
Well, I really enjoyed it. So thank you all very, very much. And I'm sorry that this kind of format doesn't allow us to chat around the edges, but anyway, this is better than not being there at all. So I'm really happy. And feel free to email me, you know, if you would like to say more, to share more about your own experiences, or ask another question.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.